This is where the world's top commentators speak out on controversial issues without the fear of the cancel culture sweeping the rest of the media. Did virtue signalling in the West embolden the Taliban? My guest tonight argues the nightmare currently unfolding in Afghanistan is one of the real-world consequences of Western figures and institutions pandering to woke warriors for a handful of likes on social media. Writing a fascinating column in the New York Post, the author of Woke Inc. and former entrepreneur Vivek Ramaswamy says that by constantly focusing on culture war issues such as systemic racism and climate change, the likes of President Joe Biden, Twitter and Disney have made America appear weak and divided on the world stage. Fragility at home, he writes, begets fragility abroad. The only way to have ensured an orderly exit from Afghanistan was to impress the fear of total decimation upon the Taliban. When the commander-in-chief obsessively criticizes the US, Washington loses its moral standing to project strength. The Taliban exploited this grim reality to the fullest extent. And Vivek, it's absolutely brilliant to have you on the show. I thought this was a fascinating column in the New York Post today. Do you really believe that the way Joe Biden has joined the woke warriors and slamming the US on a whole load of issues impacted what happened in Afghanistan?
Yeah, look, I cannot tell you definitively that it would have been different but for any one factor. But the broader point stands, which is that if there's exactly one thing that would have prevented this catastrophe from unfolding, and it is this. If the Taliban credibly believed that there was a threat of total decimation imposed by the United States for the Taliban reneging on its prior commitments, then they would have shifted their cost-benefit calculus in a different direction, and I do not think they would have taken the risk of going in for Kabul. But they knew that Joe Biden wasn't going to do it because, first, he never issued such a threat. And second, even if he did, they knew that even he believed he didn't have the moral standing to deliver on it. And why is that? It's like I said in the piece. He's obsessing over self-criticism of the United States in a way that diminishes the moral standing of the United States to use extraordinary force precisely when it needs it most. And this is one of several geopolitical consequences of wokeism. My book is actually, I believe, the first to explore some of the geopolitics of wokeism. One of the other geopolitical tools is the fact that corporate America and companies like Twitter are further aiding foreign actors like the Taliban in what they do because they have allowed the Taliban to continue tweeting to their followers while they continue to ban the 45th president of the United States permanently in the United States from communicating with his own followers. And so I think that two-faced behavior of corporate America having turned its back on America, combined with America's top leader obsessing in self-criticism that erodes his own moral standing to take extraordinary force and to use the leverage of the threat of an extraordinary force to be able to deter action and bad behavior from groups like the Taliban is part of what contributed to the catastrophe we saw on the global stage today. And I'm sorry to say that not just the United States, but I think Western civilization as we know it may be at greater risk because of it now that the Taliban controls Afghanistan.
I think you're completely right. And actually, I pointed out in my digest at the top of the show my absolute fury at the hypocrisy of a company like Twitter for allowing the Taliban to broadcast to 300,000 followers and growing. It's just astonishing given that they still haven't reinstated Donald Trump. But one of the lines that really stood out to me from your piece was when you were criticizing Biden. And you said, when the commander-in-chief of the United States obsessively criticizes our country, including by claiming, as Biden did, that systemic racism stains our national soul, Washington loses its moral standing to project strength abroad precisely at the moment we need it most. So you think potentially Biden's reaction to the Black Lives Matter movement has impacted the way that America is viewed abroad?
Absolutely. I think he is diminishing the moral standing of the United States on the global stage through engaging in obsessive self-criticism. And it's not just Joe Biden, it is elites across the United States. He's at the top of that list. But if you take a company like Disney or a basketball association like the NBA or a company like Nike, they obsessively criticize systemic racism, microaggressions, as you call it in woke terminology in the United States, in the U.S., but they don't say a peep, for example, about the true human rights atrocities in places like the Xinjiang province of China, where there are literally 1 million Uyghurs in concentration camps in something that rivals probably the greatest human rights atrocity committed by a major nation since the Third Reich of Germany. And nothing of corporate America is even saying a peep about it. In fact, companies like Disney are praising China even as they continue to film in the Xinjiang province. And that has the effect of creating a moral relativism between dictatorships like China and democracies like the United States. It's what allows Xi Jinping, when he's pressed by the EU, when he's pressed by the UN on that human rights crisis, the first thing that Xi Jinping says is that Black Lives Matter shows that the United States is no better. You think that's an accident? His top diplomat came to the Alaska summit earlier this year and said that China hopes the US does better on human rights and that China hopes the US stops slaughtering Black Americans. Of course, that is a falsehood of the highest order. But the way they're able to get away with it is when elites in the United States, from Joe Biden to Disney to Nike to the CEOs of social media companies, consistently criticize alleged moral injustice in the United States without saying a peep about truly bad actors abroad. It creates this equivalence between American idealism and nihilism in countries like China, nihilism even exercised by actors on the global stage like the Taliban. And I think that weakens the United States' moral standing to be able to strike back. And it is my opinion that the greatest geopolitical asset of all is not our nuclear arsenal here in the United States. It is our moral standing. Once we've lost that, we've lost our greatest advantage of all.
Well, of course, these woke-topians are handing victory to all of these bad actors, as you say. And something else that has really shocked me, Vivek, has been the lack of outrage from all of the feminists and the woke warriors and the Me Too types throughout the US about the Taliban actually regaining power, because what they're going to do to women's rights is far, far more important than any sort of sexual harassment or wolf whistling that goes down in Hollywood. But it feels like it's almost too big a target for a lot of these woke warriors, that they prefer these sort of soft targets in the US.
Well, one of those warriors is Joe Biden's right hand, Kamala Harris. Have we seen her in the last couple of days? She has been conspicuously absent, conspicuously silent. She knows how to criticize racism and misogyny in the United States, and it turns out that's about it. When it comes to Afghanistan, this could have been an opportunity for her to leverage her standing as the first female president of the United States. She wore it on her sleeve. She celebrated it. America celebrated it, and maybe even with good reason. But then when it came to talking about true human rights atrocities against women committed by the Taliban, this was her opportunity to shine on the global stage. And what did she do? She went into hiding. And that is the two-faced behavior of wokeism, is that it preys on the moral insecurities of Americans to be able to fill that void with the equivalent of a modern religion when old school religions have disappeared. Yet it does not do an iota of good on the global stage where actual atrocities are taking place daily. And I will tell you, mark my words today, the same goes for corporate America. The day that Taiwan is invaded by China, Disney and Nike, companies that criticize the U.S. and criticize the West, will not say a peep. In fact, I think there's a chance that they will aid and abet it indirectly by cheering it when China does. Just mark my words, this is exactly the behavior that we see from the new woke hypocrites at the top of the global woke industrial complex.
Well, thank goodness you're calling it out. But look, Vivek Ramaswamy, I want to bring in my superstar panel who are here with me today. We have the stand-up comedian, writer and commentator Abby Roberts, GBNews presenter Calvin Robinson, and author and journalist Amy Nichol. Amy, is there anything you want to take Vivek on about here?
Hi, Vivek.
Hey.
You seem very lovely, man, but I just find this completely absurd, what you're saying. The Taliban isn't interested in woke, or probably doesn't even know a thing about this. They don't hate woke, they hate the West. It's Western values. And what would be your solution? Because you're saying, American companies should become involved in global politics, and rather than what's going on their home soil. What would be your solution? What should they be doing?
Yeah, so thank you for that opportunity. I do want to clarify a couple of things. On the second point, actually, my entire thesis in my book is the opposite of that, but I wasn't clear, so I appreciate the opposite to clarify it. I think corporations should stay out of the business of social justice. They should make products and provide services for the pursuit of profit, period. But what bothers me is when, at least speaking from an American perspective, when they are consistently criticizing alleged injustices, from systemic racism to transphobia to the racially disparate impact of climate change to whatever it might be on a given day here at home, without fear of being held accountable for their sometimes false statements. They do not say a peep on the global stage. And that hypocrisy is worse than hypocrisy. It actually has geopolitical consequences in undermining the U.S. So I prefer a world in which corporations or bankers shut up and bank. That's what they should be doing. But thank you for the chance to clarify that. On the Taliban point, I also want to be really clear. Actors from the Taliban to China understand the way wokeness undermines the U.S. from within. When you have a woke president and a woke vice president, they know that that will erode their moral standing to be able to use extraordinary force, because that's just going to feed their narrative of criticism and self-criticism in the United States in a way that changes the leverage in their calculation of actually being able to pull the trigger when the time comes. The Taliban knew Joe Biden wouldn't pull the trigger when the time came to use extraordinary force. It was different. I think if a different person occupied the White House, I think their calculus would have been different. But that is exactly why they took the calculated risk that they did.
What would extraordinary force achieve? You're just delaying the problem, surely.
Yeah, so that's a good question. Okay, so I think that let's say that if you just deterred and allowed a little bit more time, would the Afghan military been able to defend itself more effectively? I'm actually personally skeptical of that. But right now we had the greatest debacle of all, a blow to the moral standing of the United States, as you have videos that are worse than what we saw in Saigon that have now empowered China, for example, in the last 24 hours to take even more aggressive measures in boosting up its military presence towards Taiwan. So I think this was the worst of all worlds. I am not saying it would have avoided the eventuality of the Taliban being able to take control of Afghanistan. It would have averted, however, the short-term disaster that we saw. And I think it would have put us in a better position to be able to continue the process of being able to at least minimize the chance that the Taliban took the calculated risk that they did in knowing that Biden would not have used even disproportionate, even the force of decimation in return. That's what they had to have taken into account in their calculus to know that they couldn't have taken this risk. And back to wokeism, just to close the loop on one point you made, look at what they're saying. They're going to create, they've borrowed the woke lexicon, an inclusive form of government. They're signaling in the same type of virtue-based lexicon as the West, even as they're shooting women who don't wear a burqa on the street. So I think that that's part of what's going on here.
Calvin Robinson.
Vivek, thank you for talking so much sense. It's very pleasing to hear. But it's not just the woke left that are not challenging this situation, is it? We're also seeing people on the right talking about sitting down for diplomatic conversations with the Taliban, a terrorist group. No one's challenging what's going on. No one's standing up to this tyranny that's essentially taken over Afghanistan.
Well, let me give you my critique of the right, and then I want to come back to your point, which is a little more nuanced in terms of what I think the go-forward strategy could be. My criticism of the right is, well, the old right, at least the George Bush-led right, Dick Cheney-led right, is that you had this military-industrial complex where you had private companies and defense contractors that had absolutely zero financial incentive to be able to stand up the Afghan military to operate on its own 2 feet. Because if they did that, then their high-paid services wouldn't have been required over the last 20 years, bilking American taxpayers. And by the way, some of your guys' money probably went to train the allies who were in that same fight as well. That is, I think, the marriage of big government and big business that really got us here. I write about a different marriage of big government and big business in my book, what I call the woke industrial complex, where, again, the people who are at top the woke capitalist hierarchy have no interest in addressing racism, because otherwise they would have no smokescreen to cover up their actual business practices, which is what the projection of woke values does in big business in America. But anyway, that's my critique of the right, is its role in propping up the military-industrial complex and a private set of contractors who will now go sit on whatever think tank board they want to sit on, or go back to sitting on the board of Raytheon or Lockheed Martin or whatever it is these people do to grub for money, but without any actual accountability. And that includes Republicans every bit as much, even if not more, than Democrats in the United States. Now, to your point about where we go from here, look, I think the reality is we just have to accept it. The Taliban is in charge of Afghanistan. Like it or not, that's the reality today. What do we do going forward? And I personally think, from the standpoint of the United States, I personally believe from the civilized Western world's standpoint, the single greatest threat to freedom and free and open societies on this earth is the rise of the Communist Party of China. And we cannot lose sight of that greater threat as we really put together our geopolitical strategies in other parts of the world. So I think we've got to keep that north star in mind.
Taliban as a government as well, weren't they?
Yeah. Of course they
were.
Of course they were. Abby Roberts.
Hi. Thanks so much for, again, speaking so much sense, as Calvin just said. Yeah, I've got a broader question for you, which is, I saw a great cartoon on Twitter the other day, which was the Statue of Liberty smoking a cigarette with her torch just kind of flung to the side, sort of looking really depressed. And one question is, what's happened to the American dream? Are people going to still pursue that? Are we still talking about that? And my second question is, where do the UK and the US, where does our relationship go from here? Because it was bad, let's be honest, maybe last year. And now after this, it's looking, shall we say, you know, like we might be going to the divorce courts. But what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so look, the American dream is really simple. It is the idea that no matter who you are or where your parents came from or what your skin color is, you can achieve anything you ever want in this country with your own hard work, your own commitment, and your own dedication. And that means something to me. It's personal to me because it is the dream that I have lived, being the kid of immigrants who came to this country with almost no money, to having had the privilege of founding multi-billion-dollar companies and hopefully doing some good in the process. That is the American dream. What happened to it was your question. I have a really simple answer of what happened to it. We woke up. And once you wake up from a dream, you forget what it was all about. You might remember how it felt for a little while. Pretty soon you forget that too. That is the real danger of wokeness in America. We woke up from the American dream. Now, I still think we have time to get it right. If the 2010s were our decade of celebrating our diversity and our differences, then so be it. I think the 2020s ought to be our decade of still remembering what binds us together as one people. And I think that applies. I'm talking about it in an American context, but I actually think once you have a revival of America defined not as a place, but on the basis of the ideals that define this country, including the American dream, that creates the opportunity for solidarity with countries like the UK. And as far as I'm concerned, any other country that wants to sign up to those same ideals too, whether you're in the West, whether you're India, whether you're the UK, whether you're a country who espouses those democratic values, those individualist principles, the principles of liberty and prosperity and the pursuit of happiness that define much of Western civilization, but especially the American dream and the American context of it. I think that can actually create solidarity around idealism, the notion of idealism as a counterweight to nihilism, which is the other force that we see rising on the global stage. The CCP, I think Russia are at the vanguard and the standard bearers of the nihilist column. I think that we ought to revive idealism as an appropriate counterweight to the otherwise inevitable rise of nihilism in places that we do not want, setting the standard of the ways in which the world in the 21st century ends up living. And I think that is one of the battles that it's going to take brave leaders to be able to step up and ultimately wage that battle, because it's automatically nihilism beats idealism every time. It takes cultivating that culture of idealism for idealism to ultimately win.
Welcome to the GB News YouTube channel. You can watch us live 24 hours a day, catch up on your favourite shows, and join in the conversation in the comments below.
Don't forget to subscribe and you'll never miss any of our exclusive content.